I've often said that the decisions we make in this election and in the next few years will set the course for the next generation. That's true for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's true for our economy. It's especially true for our energy policy. And so although this is a town hall meeting, I'm going to spend about 20 minutes speaking to you with some specificity about the situation when it comes to energy. The urgency of the challenge is clear to anyone who's tried to fill up a gas tank lately. With gas well over $4 a gallon, we saw world oil prices go up another $10 today. It's clear to the legions of scientists who believe that we're nearing a point of no return when it comes to the issue of the global climate crisis. With each passing day, it's clear that our addiction to fossil fuels is one of the most serious threats to our national security in the 21st century. For the last 8 years, this administration has narrowly defined security as fighting an open-ended war in Iraq. But in the interconnected world of the new century, new threats come from stateless terrorists, loose nuclear weapons, the spread of pandemic disease, an inability to compete with the rising powers in the global economy, the threat of global climate change, and our dependence on foreign oil. And I'm going to be talking about all these threats over the next week and the weeks to come, but I want to really focus on energy today. We know that the carbon emissions released by countries across the globe are warming the planet, which is leading to devastating weather patterns, terrible storms, drought, and famine. In fact, studies show that by 2050, famine could displace more than 250 million people worldwide. And although that famine may not and is not likely to affect us here, it will affect world food prices, which means when you go into the grocery store and you've seen a loaf of bread go up by 30%, that is being impacted to some degree by changing weather patterns. It means people competing for food and water in the next 50 years in the very places that have known horrific violence in the last 50 years. Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. That's a threat to our security when you see these areas destabilized because people don't have enough food. An even more immediate and direct security threat comes from our dependence on foreign oil. The price of a barrel of oil is now the most dangerous weapon in the world, one of the most dangerous weapons in the world. Tyrants from Caracas, Venezuela, to Tehran in Iran use it to prop up their regimes, intimidate international communities, and hold us hostage to a market that's subject to their whims. Just to give you an example, if Iran decided to shut down the petroleum-rich Strait of Hormuz tomorrow, they believe oil will skyrocket to $300 a barrel in minutes, a price that one speculator predicts would result in $12 a gallon gas. $12 a gallon. The nearly $700 million a day we send to unstable and hostile nations also funds both sides of the war on terror, paying for everything from madrasas that plant the seeds of terror in young minds to the bombs that go off in Baghdad and Kabul. Our oil addiction even presents a target for Osama bin Laden, who has told al-Qaeda, and I quote, "Focus your operations on oil since this will cause the Americans to die off on their own," unquote. If we stay on our current course, the rapid growth of nations like China and India will rise about a third by 2030. In the same year, Middle Eastern regimes will be sitting on 83% of our global oil reserves. Let me explain this. 83% of the oil in the world is going to be in the Middle East. Imagine that, the very source of energy that fuels nearly all of our transportation, controlled by some of the world's most unstable and undemocratic governments. That's not the future I want for America. We are not a country that places our fate in the hands of dictators and tyrants. We're a nation that controls our own destiny. That's who we are. That's who we are, and that's who we've always been. It's what led us to wage a revolution that brought down an empire. It's how we built an arsenal of democracy to defeat fascism and stopped the spread of communism with the power of our ideals. And that's why we have to end the tyranny of oil in our time, in this generation. Now, I recognize this is a debate we're having in this campaign, but understand we've been having this debate for decades now. We've heard promises about energy independence from every single U.S. president since Richard Nixon. We've heard talk about curbing our use of fossil fuels in nearly every State of the Union address since the oil embargo of 1973. Back then, we imported a third of this nation's oil. We now import over half. So during all this talk, we've actually increased our dependence on foreign oil. Now, a few days ago, Senator John McCain said, I'm quoting, "Our dangerous dependence on foreign oil has been 30 years in the making and was caused by the failure of politicians in Washington to think long-term about the future of the country," unquote. I could not agree more. John McCain is exactly right. The only problem is that during those 30 years of inaction, Senator McCain was one of those politicians in Washington for 26. And during the 26 years that he was there, he's achieved little to help reduce our dependence on foreign oil. He voted against raising our fuel mileage standards when it could have made such a difference over the last couple of decades. And he joined George Bush in opposing legislation twice in the last year that included tax credits for more efficient cars. He's voted against alternative sources of energy, against clean biofuels, against solar power, against wind power, against an energy bill that represented the largest investment in renewable sources of energy in the history of this country. So when John McCain talks about the failure of politicians in Washington to do anything about our energy crisis, understand that John McCain should look in the mirror because he has been part of that failure. When he proposes policies that give $4 billion in tax breaks to oil companies, but only pennies a day to Americans struggling with high gas prices, understand that that's not part of the solution in Washington, that's part of the problem in Washington. What he's offered is a plan that doesn't make any real investment in alternative sources of energy, that represents a failure to think long-term about our nation's future. That's what we've had enough of in this country for too many years. And that's why we need to change it in November. That's why I'm running for president, to change Washington and change these policies. Now, I won't pretend that this change will be easy or that it will come without significant cost or some measure of sacrifice from the American people. Achieving energy independence is one of the greatest challenges we've ever faced. It's going to be the great project of our generation. But I believe that progress is not only possible, but imperative. When I arrived in the United States Senate, I worked with Democrats and Republicans to pass a law that will give Americans the chance to fill up their cars with clean biofuels. I passed a law that will fuel the research needed to develop a car that can get 500 miles on a gallon of gas. I reached across the aisle to come up with a plan that raises the mileage standards of our cars for the first time in 30 years, a plan that won the support of Democrats and Republicans who had never supported raising fuel standards before. Today, with oil and gas prices this high, we hear a lot of plans and proposals out of Washington since politicians are finally paying attention. The problem is they're reacting instead of acting. They're searching for the easy answer that'll get them through the next election instead of serious long-term solutions that will offer real relief and real security for America. Now, let me say this, Dayton. I understand politics. I understand politics. And in a country that's desperate for action right now, ideas like a gas tax holiday or expanded oil drilling in the waters off our coasts are popular. They poll very well. And I'll say this, if there were real evidence that these steps would actually provide real, immediate relief at the pump, save you money when you go to the gas pump, and advance the long-term goal of energy independence, then of course I would be open to them. But so far, there's no such proof. As good as they sound, the history of gas tax holidays is that prices go up to fill in the gap, and that the big winners end up being the retailers and the oil companies, not the American people. If you think that by eliminating the gas tax, oil companies are going to bring down the price of oil, I can tell you that we tried this in Illinois when I was in the state legislature. Prices didn't go down for consumers, but the oil companies made out like bandits. That's why we ended up repealing it. It did not work. And in the meantime, it would take billions of dollars out of the federal highway fund that are critical to rebuilding our roads and our bridges, and that can actually make our roads more efficient and our cars run more efficiently on them. Not to mention costing us hundreds of thousands of Americans' jobs. Now, when it comes to offshore drilling, you've been hearing a lot about drilling lately. Even Senator McCain and George Bush's Office of Energy have acknowledged that it won't provide short-term relief. If we started drilling today, the first drop of oil wouldn't come for another 7 years. And even then, it wouldn't have a lot of impact on prices because it would go to a world oil market. The Chinese and the Indians, they'd be buying that oil just like us. You would not see a significant savings. Everybody agrees with that. Meanwhile, the oil companies currently have the rights already to drill 68 million acres of land and offshore areas that they haven't touched. So the oil companies already have 68 million acres that they're not using effectively. And yet, John McCain is talking about giving them more land to drill with no guarantee that that would actually produce lower gas prices. I believe that before we give the oil companies any more land, it's time we tell them to start drilling on the land they already have or turn it over to somebody who will, because we need that oil. We should also invest in the technology that can help us recover more oil from existing fields. We should also look to our substantial natural gas reserves to tap a source of energy that's already powered buses and cars here and around the world. Now, in the long term, we have to remember that our domestic resources are finite. Even if you opened up every square inch of our land and our coasts for drilling, every square inch, let's say that we said, all right, we can drill anywhere, anytime. America still only has 3% of the world's oil reserves, 3%. In the meantime, we use about a quarter of the world's oil, 25%. Senator McCain may believe otherwise, but drilling is not a real solution to our energy crisis. So what we need are real ideas to give hardworking Americans relief from high gas prices and serious long-term investments to permanently reduce our dependence on foreign oil. And that's exactly what my plan does. I want to just outline what I'm going to do. To provide some immediate relief, I've proposed a second $50 billion stimulus package that would send energy rebate checks to every American so that you've got a few hundred dollars in your pocket to help deal with rising prices right now. I've asked Senator McCain to join me in passing such a plan, and I extend that invitation again today. I've also proposed a $1,000 middle-class tax cut that would go to 95% of workers and their families. So, that would provide you some immediate relief right now to deal with the rising prices that are having such an impact this summer and into the fall. I'm also going to crack down on oil speculators who may be artificially driving up the price of oil. So those are all steps that we can take right away, but to truly reduce our long-term dependence on foreign oil, my plan is going to fast-track $150 billion of investment in clean energy to help create the fuel-efficient cars and alternative sources of energy that will secure this nation and jumpstart a green economy. It's a plan that will reduce our consumption 10 billion barrels per day by 2030, which is more than all the oil we're expected to import from OPEC nations in that same year. Think about that. We can, by reducing our consumption, save the same amount that we import from all the OPEC nations. That's the direction that we've got to take. Now, here's how we do it. Here's how we do it. First, we'll double our fuel mileage standards over the next 2 decades, utilizing much of the technology we have on the shelf today, a step that will save this country 500 billion gallons of gasoline, which is the equivalent of cutting the price of a gallon of gas in half. I will provide tax credits and loan guarantees for our automakers to help them make this transition. That's number one. Second, we'll launch a venture capital fund that will provide $50 billion over 5 years to get the most promising clean energy technologies out of the lab and into the marketplace. And a principal focus of this fund will be continuing the work I began in the Senate and investing in plug-in hybrid batteries that will allow cars to get up to 500 miles per gallon. And by the way, I'm glad that Senator McCain now understands the importance of this battery technology, but it's going to take a lot more than a cash prize, Reader's Digest sweepstakes, to achieve this goal. It's going to take serious investment on the part of the federal government in partnership with the auto companies, with research universities, with states like Ohio and Michigan and Indiana that have a long history of working in the automotive field. Third, to create a market for alternative sources of energy like solar and wind, I will require that 25% of our electricity comes from renewable sources by 2025 and that we produce 2 billion gallons of advanced cellulosic biofuels by 2013. And we're also going to invest in finding cleaner ways to use coal, our nation's most abundant energy source, and safer ways to use nuclear power and store nuclear waste. Number 4, we'll use our Clean Energy Fund to invest over $1 billion a year to retool and modernize our factories and build the advanced technology cars, trucks, and SUVs of the future so that jobs and industries of the future are created right here in the United States of America, not overseas. Finally, one of the fastest, easiest, and cheapest ways to conserve energy and use less oil is to make America more energy efficient and more competitive with the world. That's why when I'm president, I'll call on business, government, and the American people to make America 50% more energy efficient by 2030. When all is said and done, my plan to invest $150 billion in alternative energy will create entire new industries, thousands of new jobs, and up to 5 million, thousands of new businesses, and up to 5 million new jobs in the green industries that pay well and cannot be outsourced. And we pay for all of it by taking away tax breaks for companies, for oil companies, and putting a price on carbon pollution, a step that will also reduce our carbon emissions by 80% by 2050 and will help us roll back global warming. Now, most importantly, this plan will ensure that we control the energy we use with resources and technology that are available today. The steps that I just spoke about are not far off pie-in-the-sky solutions. They are here and they are now. Today, there are waiting lists for fuel-efficient cars. There's an old steel mill in Pennsylvania that has become the home of a new wind turbine factory. I've seen small businesses in Nevada powered entirely by solar power. Across the planet, countries like Germany and the United Kingdom have already implemented clean energy policies that are reducing their carbon emissions right now. And leaders like Tony Blair and Angela Merkel have done a great job of raising the visibility of climate change within the G8 countries. Now it is our time to lead, to show that this future is possible for America. You know, the last time in the last century, during the days that followed the attack on Pearl Harbor, the American people were asked almost overnight to transform a peacetime economy that was still climbing out of the depths of the Great Depression into an arsenal of democracy that could wage war across 3 continents. And many doubted whether this could be achieved in time or even at all. And Franklin Roosevelt's own advisors told him that his goals for wartime production were unrealistic and impossible to meet. But FDR simply waved them off, saying, "Believe me, the production people can do it if they really try." That was FDR's attitude. Don't tell me we can't do it. Yes, we can. So Dayton, the challenges we face from our energy dependence are great. Meeting it will take time and it won't be easy. But if we're willing to work at it and invest in it and sacrifice for it, if we're willing to summon the same spirit of optimism and possibility that has defined this country's greatest progress, then I believe that we too can do it if we really try. Yes, we can. And I look forward to trying with you, Dayton. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.